Cowardly in combat, weak in stat, and wonderfully flavorful in design, today's TPK or bust covers the Brass Dragon. For the first metallic dragon on this list, I'll try to cover the differences in metallic versus gem versus chromatic dragons for those of you who haven't had the opportunity to run one. For the offense category, there is something that needs to be covered, and it's CR in relation to other dragons. I try to cover this in other videos by comparing the damage and changes that appear across all the dragons, and seeing which stats and abilities jump out to me and highlighting them. And I'll try to play fairly for this dragon, like I do all the others. This one specifically just has a lower CR rating, so if my interpretation is a little bit skewed because of this, you'll know why. Dealing an average of 43 damage on all 3 hits, its traditional Bite Claw Claw combo is quite normal for its metallic kin. Unlike the chromatic dragons, it does not get an additional damage dice based on its breath attack damage. Instead, metallic dragons get a secondary breath attack option, which gives them a bunch of extra versatility in combat, but just a little bit less damage per turn. Speaking of the breath attacks, the first one is a fire breath attack, which is honestly a bit lackluster. Without a secondary effect like the Amethyst Dragon Force breath attack, the fire breath dealing an average of 45 damage in a 60-foot cone just isn't that great. But considering the saving throw is lower based on the CR, I would say this is a little below average, but not too much worse. Its second breath attack, however, is very interesting. A sleeping gas that on a DC 18 con save is a bit hit or miss. Most parties can either resist the effect outright or make the saving throw every time. But more than once, it could be spamming this ability, and it could be demanding on saving throws to succeed over and over and over against sleep, especially if the dragon keeps getting lucky on the breath recharges. Sleeping is a powerful effect, but like I said, it can be easily cleansed with other things like actions from party members who are awake. If this dragon wasn't so interested in conversation and running away, I might just rank this ability as an instant win against some parties entirely, as the sleep lasts for 10 minutes. A great sneak attack, gas breath attack, could simply knock out the spellcasters and give the dragon a chance to pounce on the rest of the party, separating them and keeping them from waking up their allies, holding them in melee range long enough to refresh its breath attack, which would allow it to try for the sleep again, or, if it was lucky enough in the first place to get almost all of them, it can line up a great breath attack for its fire damage. Lastly, the legendary actions are looking pretty average for most dragons. For one legendary action, it can use the Detect action, which, the dragon is so cowardly, I doubt this is used for anything other than defense or some sort of trap. For 2 legendary actions, it has the classic Tail attack. With an average damage of 15, it's pretty much the same as the other dragons. But I will admit, I like the design of the tail. It's pretty cool. For 3 legendary actions, it's my personal favorite, as usual. The Wing attack is always such a powerful effect to spam every round to reposition and get the fighters really angry at you. Dealing an average of 13 damage as well isn't that bad either. Look, when I was reading about these dragons, I was led to believe that they were softer than other dragons, and I don't see that really reflected in its offensive stats. Like, sure, the breath attack is a little underwhelming, but if you play your cards right, an aggressive brass dragon could be a threat if given the right opportunity and setting. Overall, the average combat damage isn't like super good or bad, and the low fire damage may be a bit rough on the breath attack, but that sleep breath attack, such a great offensive tool that the brass dragon is getting a very solid offensive score of 6.1 out of 10. Almost an entire point of that score is dedicated to the sleep breath attack. Yes, I am aware, elves cannot be put to sleep by this. Yes, it can be resisted, saved against, cleansed, or otherwise just won't affect creatures outside of its weight class, like the rival blue dragons that come into territory disputes with it. But the times that it can use the breath attack to greater effect makes me believe that some fights will just outright be won before they even begin. For skill, I have to really debate what it means to be this kind of dragon. Similar to the role of the bard, they are extremely social. They make friends all over the place. Like, it's almost worth giving the brass dragon a whole conversation about its profession in conversation. I'll wrap back around to this, but keep that in mind as I move on. For its stats, this dragon is looking a little slim, to be honest. It's got a 23 strength, 10 dexterity, 21 constitution, 14 intelligence, 13 wisdom, and a 17 charisma. I can understand that with the lower CR, that the stats shrink as well, but honestly, it having a 10 dexterity is insulting for this dragon. In lower, it's supposed to be faster and more agile than other dragons, able to run away and outpace others. And it's just sitting with a low dexterity and no additional movement speed. It can easily just be another thing that 5th edition brushed over to make the game easier to understand, but I truly think this is an insult to this dragon. A 12 dexterity would be fair without having to give it a CR bump up. Like, it's ridiculous. But, as it is, once again, a low dexterity means this thing will be failing important saving throws to avoid damage or crowd control effects, which further restricts its combat abilities. Although its layer actions make for an interesting note. The first one says that a strong wind blows players away who fail a saving throw, and knocks them prone. It then states that any gases and flames in the area are blown out or blown away. So the question is, does that sleeping gas breath attack linger after it's used? Would you rule that after 2 or 3 times of the breath attack, does it stay? Is it a turn-by-turn effect? And if so, is it flammable? Can the dragon put the whole party to sleep, line up a devastating breath attack, and torch the party in a huge burst, and then follow that damage up by even more fire damage, as the gas ignites and explodes in the area? I mean, the dragon's immune to fire, why not? I sincerely doubt this works rules as written, but I really want it to. But the more you think about it, and the more you actually put it together, you need to decide if this dragon needs to do this, or if this dragon even can. Look, it has a non-confrontational personality. It's relatively low intelligence compared to its other brethren, and honestly, just softer nature might not be the best place to start thinking of new war crimes to commit on your players. For the second effect, you're looking at a 20-foot sphere that blinds targets who fail a pretty easy DC 15 con save. Like I stated on the Blue Dragon, I think this is kind of a layer action that's just a less powerful darkness. It's still very good in specific situations, but I just don't think it's as powerful. Sadly, there is no third layer action, which is a bit of a shame, but this is a common thing with metallic families. I suppose the power of that second breath attack option has to actually come from somewhere on the sheet. Lastly, I need to discuss the change shape ability in a bit more detail, and why it's more powerful than it's led on to be, and why the Brass Dragon not having it is a very big deal. Being able to polymorph into any creature, humanoid or not, at will, is a very powerful option for any dragon, able to take the form of a human and get into the societies that surround their domain and the domains of their rival dragon kind, makes the metallic dragons so effective at being guardians of peace. They are able to understand the world around them better, to understand the motivations of the mortals that rule the land around them. This also covers their tracks and leads dangers away from its lair instead of to its lair. But with the Brass Dragon having to talk to so many social circles as a dragon, it's unable to hide itself. It's going to be attracting attention from everybody, good and bad, including rivals. And as much as the ability is niche, it is powerful in its own right, and the Brass Dragon not having it is a huge penalty to its power. There is something to be noted that while technically it doesn't have a spell list, it is always under the effect of talk to animals. and happily can converse with any creature around its biome. Its flying speed at 80 isn't impressive, it's the same. Again, it should have a 90 or an 85 or something. But I do like that burrow speed. It's especially flavorful for the sand and rocks that make up the desert biome. I think it's a perfect fit for this kind of dragon, and even doubly so considering it's a coward, it can dig its way around. With some common bonuses to dexterity, constitution, wisdom, and charisma saving throws, per its dragon heritage, it does alleviate some of these weaker points, but not to the extent that it saves it from a bad rating. Other notes is that for its usual 60-foot blind sight and 120 feet dark vision, both are powerful tools in combat but common for all dragons. And lastly, as promised, the communication skills of these dragons is actually a huge bonus to why I find them more dangerous than I've led you to believe. They make friends by spending the gold they don't want anyways, to help cities that are struggling in their biome. They help organize and take down massive threats like angry blue dragons who threaten the balance of the entire home that everyone lives in. They talk to, obsess over, and hoard friends like gold. They are arrogant of their presence, claiming that their presence alone is a gift to every creature they meet. And I truly believe that if you catch a brass dragon lacking, it's gonna be easy pickings. But if it gets away, and it tattles on you to all of its very good friends, you know, all those creatures it can talk to, every merchant it knows in the area, every single city that it's helped, you suddenly will have an army of monsters and merchants who hate every single person in your party. But as a good-aligned dragon, I just don't see this kind of player versus dragon interaction happening often, or even at all. Even less so when you consider that brass dragons only want to talk to you anyways. They have little interest in killing you or fighting you. For skills, it took me a bit. I have to consider its abilities, its lackluster lair actions, and the powerful communication tool it has against its overall talents and weaknesses. I think a very comfortable 5.9 is more than fair, probably a little bit too much, but I would like to give the brass dragon a little bit more leeway, but honestly, the disappointing lair actions, lower stats, and weak dexterity kept pulling the score lower and lower, despite the ability of being able to have an army at its command at practically any time. For defenses, I do admit these dragons may not have much going for them in the grand scheme of it all. With a very, very small HP pool of 172 and an average AC of 18, I want to say, on a side note, that even considering the lower CR, this thing should have a little bit more health, and it should still have a 19 AC. I'm sorry, but dragons should be tough, not squishy like measly plate mail. From here on, it actually just gets worse. Sadly, considering the nature of the dragon, and its low dexterity overall, and even worse, a lower intelligence saving throw than average, spells like Ice Knife, Tosh's Mind Whip, and Phantasmal Killer will be extra effective on this dragon. With so little HP to sponge up spell damage, it can't afford to take those hits. It has to be able to reliably take half from sources that are going to do a lot of damage to it, and it just can't. Its only real defensive bonus is its immunity to fire, a very common burst damage option for many spellcasters, but honestly, even putting that into account is barely a drop in the bucket compared to the flaws I'm seeing. I'll get even more specific. It's about the nature of the dragon. It's really just a coward. It's a runner with no bonuses to speed. I find that if it did ever find itself in a fight, it's not smart enough to be tactical and effective, nor wise enough to fall back on fighting instincts. It's going to run into traps relatively often, and honestly make mistakes that take excess damage where it could otherwise minimize or outright avoid it. It doesn't have the HP or the AC to brawl, it doesn't have the intelligence to run away and analyze a fight better like a blue dragon, it doesn't have the cruelty of black, nor the skill or the magic of amethyst. It has nothing going for it. In fact, the final defense score for the brass dragon is a very, very low 2.2 out of 10. Look, I hate to just stomp all over the dragon here, but like, it needs to be said. These dragons are considered the weakest of their metallic kin, and honestly, I'm starting to see why after reading more about them. Lastly is the flavor, which, starting with the obvious, is the first and foremost question on my mind, which happens to be the sleep breath attack, and what an overall cowardly brass dragon would do with it. Would the dragon, if forced into combat, use the breath attack in a tactical way? Would it keep out of reach and hope for a lucky shot and knocking out multiple targets before pouncing in? Does it split the party and keep them from landing critical strikes? I don't see it. I want to give it the benefit of the doubt with 14 intelligence. I really do, but realistically, I don't think it has the heart nor the experience to be effective in combat. Not in the real way it needs to be. It would rather talk and learn about the people it's fighting than actually fight them. I really like that part about them, though. It's a good aligned dragon. It's really just lovable. And they want to make friends and talk way too much. They protect their own. They work hard to keep what they have safe from much, much more powerful forces around them, with camaraderie and overall good taste in furniture. The brass dragon has a few neat features in terms of design I really enjoy. Between the shape of the dragon and the color pattern, I enjoy the smaller details and the smaller stature compared to other dragons. I like how even as the smallest of its kin, it tries its best to compete with threats like blue dragons. It knows it can't fight them. It runs and tries to assimilate an army. It knows it cannot kill bigger threats than itself, so it makes friends. Like the underdogs of a classic fairy tale, they do what they can with what they got. And I'm a softie for an underdog story. For flavor, I'll be a little overly generous here. I'm going to give the brass dragon a 7.0 out of 10. I probably shouldn't, but I really just enjoy the design of the dragon. Regardless of the combat flaws, regardless of the weaknesses, it's actually just this massive, powerful tool in a GM's arsenal. A dragon with friends all over? Now that's interesting. But a dragon with friends all over that's united with a party? Now that would make for a good story hook. So when I settle down and take everything into consideration, I have to boil down the brass dragon down to its very bare features and analyze all of its strengths and weaknesses. Its overall score is 5.3 out of 10, landing the brass dragon firmly in the basic brawl group. Look, overall, it's clear that in a true dragon fight fashion, with them breathing fire and flying around, they just can't do it like other dragons. Honestly, they're just not built for it. They're not built for fighting. Sure, they can summon armies, and they have friends. They collect art. They spin tales and speeches to those friends, and make an impact on the realm around them with their words, not their claws. I think to really understand how good these dragons are, you need to understand charisma. More so, how charisma affects a game. Charisma is one of those stats that, to new players and to veteran GMs, it sometimes is elusive. Its power level scales strangely inside and outside of combat. The meme that the bard can sleep with anything is there for a reason. Charisma is very powerful used in the right situation. For the GMs that are trying to use them against a party and effectively in combat, make sure to look into using the breath attacks as much as possible, and not the fire one, the sleep one. Trying to split the party with grapples and flyby attacks is probably your best chance of avoiding as much damage as possible. If you can sleep the wizard and snatch the rest of the party and throw them into a tunnel, and then sleep somebody else and then just split them up over and over and over, that's probably your best bet of winning that fight, or at least getting 1 or 2 kills. The more you can keep the party from bursting the dragon's HP, the better. They are super squishy. Do not let the party engage in melee combat. Use the tunnels to bottleneck them. Keep them coming in lines of 1 or 2. Do not let them surround you. Do not let them get opportunities to attack. Do not let them have line of sight. And otherwise, try to use that 14 intelligence as best as you can. Whew! This video has taken forever, but There was so much to talk about and learn about. I wanted to give the Brass Dragon a fighting chance on this tier list. For those of you who are still here, thanks for watching the video and holding out this long. If I could give you a level up, I would. But unless you're in one of my games, that's not an option. If you want to support me, remember to subscribe and check out my other content around this channel and on my other platforms. And I'll see you next time. If streaming games, playing D&D, talking about all things nerdy, and even embarrassing myself on live is good enough for you, well, maybe check out my content. And thanks for watching this one. I really appreciate it. If you need to find me, go ahead and look at my links down below, and maybe check out some of my other videos on TikTok and Twitch.